Hi folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This video is part of my beginner series and will focus on learning your first chords. In a previous video, I went over the notes in open position, and in most of my beginner lessons, I spend about half the time on learning notes and getting familiar with the fretboard, and the other half on learning chords and working on strumming. Now out of those two components, I would say that notes are easier to learn. Most of my students can learn the basic exercises and songs with semi-regular practice. But chords are usually the tough part. It really takes consistent practice to get them to sound good, and then a sound routine focusing on strumming and rhythm to get you in good guitar habits. So I'm going to introduce 4 basic open position chords and demonstrate the various aspects of a good chord practice routine. So your first chord is G. It's going to look and sound like this. Okay? So you take your middle finger and you put it on the 3rd fret of the low E string, and you sneak your ring finger in on the 3rd fret of the high E string. You strum all 6 strings, just all the way through. Okay? Now what's happening here is your middle finger is actually supposed to be bumping the A string, and pretty much everybody does that naturally when they throw down this chord. And that's a good thing. You want, like, this part of your finger to be muting that 5th string so it doesn't ring out. We're not using it. And when you strum through all 6 strings, you don't hear any, you don't hear this. I mean, it's masked by the percussive quality of all the other strings. So that's what we want. There's your G chord. So go ahead and take some time and try to play that one. You can pause the video if necessary. And I just want to say a few notes about G. You should be aware that there are multiple versions of the G chord. So there's this one that uses 2 fingers. There's one that uses 3 fingers, looks like this. There's one that uses 4 fingers, looks like this. If you want to take it a step further, there's bar chords. You can play this one. That's down the road. We'll stick to the open position chords for now. But they're all the same chord. They're all G, and they just each sound a little bit different and are effective in different contexts. So the first one, 2 fingers, that's my favorite. It's the one I play every day on a regular basis. It's also the one I teach to all of my students because I think it's the simplest. It's 2 fingers, easy to remember and fairly comfortable compared to some of the other chords we'll get to. Most people don't have too many problems with it. I'd say maybe like 95, 97% of my students could play this chord in their first lesson. Now I'm not going to say it's easy or a piece of cake, but it's doable. Now if someone comes into a lesson and they already know another version of G, maybe because they've had some previous lessons with someone else, or maybe they looked up some chords on their own, that's perfectly okay. You can play whichever G chord you like the best and or is most comfortable. As long as you can play it somewhat smoothly and transition to and from it, go ahead and use it. I'm not going to make you relearn something that's already good for you. But again, if you come in cold, I'm going to recommend this one. However, we may get to the other ones at some point, depending on what songs you want to play. And really, as you grow as a musician and as a guitar player, you'll be able to decide what G sounds best in a given context. For example, if I do this 3-finger G, you may notice it has a little bit richer sound than the 2-finger. The 2-finger is nice and crisp and clean. It's just my favorite, but the 3-finger has that extra low note that extra note in the lower register. So it's got a little bit richer sound, and you may feel that a certain song calls for that. You know, maybe you want to emphasize the lower strings a little bit more. Something like that, you know, or maybe you're going to move this note around, like. You know, so just some things to consider. The 4-finger G, that's the Wonderwall chord, or the Wonderwall G, you know. So, you know, in that particular song, that's the voicing they use, and it's actually kind of a common pop sound, pop rock, this G with the 2 notes on top, always kind of ringing out. So you may hear that in some other songs, and or if you're writing songs, you may just want to go for that. Or if you're writing songs, you may just want to go for that sound. It's up to you. It's just good to be able to recognize it and know where it's appropriate to use. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on G. So take it as you will. So let's move on to the next chord, E minor. It is going to look and sound like this. Another 2-finger chord. My middle finger is on the 2nd fret of the A string, and my ring finger is on the 2nd fret of the D string. And I'm strumming all 6 strings like that. Alright, so go ahead and try that one out. Now I would recommend playing it like this, with the middle finger and the ring finger. But if you really, really want to, you can play it like this, with the 1st finger on the A string and the middle finger on the D string. It doesn't make a huge difference right now. Down the road, when we learn E major, if you play it with the middle finger and the ring finger, to make it major, all you do is add 1 more finger. So that's kind of easy to remember. And convenient. It's a good habit to get into. But again, right now, you can just do whatever is most comfortable for you. So we got 2 chords, and at this point, I usually have students go back and forth a few times between G and E minor. Just strum the chord once, and then switch to the next chord. Taking your time and making sure the fingers are on the right frets. All right, just get used to that a little bit. And this is also where we want to focus on beautifying the chord. We want to make sure they sound as perfect as possible. So if you hear anything like this, here's an E minor. Any buzzing or any dead notes, now is the time to fix it. So you need to listen and feel for any duds or interference. Now I recommend playing each chord string by string to identify problems. So each string should ring out clearly if you're playing it correctly. And if not, it's likely one of 2 very common problems. Either you're not pushing a string down hard enough, you're not applying enough pressure, or parts of your finger are bumping into other strings, and that's also not good. So again, you kind of need to be able to feel where those problems are. So for example, when I play this E minor, if it sounds like this, a couple of strings are having problems there. I go through string by string. So that A string, the note is not ringing out at all, and that's because my middle finger is just not pushing down hard enough. So all I got to do is push down a little more firmly, and that note starts to ring out. Most people, when they start playing guitar, they actually don't realize how hard you need to press down. And I don't like saying hard. I don't like telling someone to push down harder. I usually use the word firm, push down more firmly, or apply a little bit more pressure, because when I say hard, people think that they really need to, just kill their fingers and push down as hard as they can. That's not the case. It may feel like that in the beginning, but really, after a little bit of practice, you're going to realize that, well, first of all, your hand's going to get a little bit stronger, and you're going to realize it's more about finding the sweet spot. And, a couple months down the road, you may realize, like, oh, I'm not actually pushing down that hard. It's just, you find a sufficient amount of pressure and you do that. Now, if you're playing chords all day and you're playing some tougher bar chords, yeah, of course your hand may get tired because you do have to, do a little bit more gripping and pressing. But, for standard chord playing, for these simple beginner chords just starting off, you don't have to, break through the guitar neck or anything like that. So I push down with a sufficient amount of pressure, somewhat firmly, and then now my G string is being interfered with one of my fingers, and I can actually feel it bumping my ring finger kind of lower down here, similar to when we played the G chord and our middle finger is blocking that A string. Well, in this case, we don't want that to happen, so we have to unblock it. And all I gotta do is just, adjust my hand a little bit until that string is opened up, and then I'm good to go. Okay, so a little tiny adjustment was all that was necessary. You don't need to, completely, warp your hand crazily or anything like that. It's just literally from here to here. Here, no good, to here. See how little my hand moves? Okay, so there we go. Now this is the type of work that needs to be done on your own when you practice. In the lesson, I'm more than happy to play doctor and point out the issues and try to fix them on the spot, and try to get your fingers exactly perfect. But you need to take that, mindset home and practice this on a regular basis, and kind of take little mental notes of what you should be doing, like common problems that keep coming up, and work to eliminate them. So, again, feel out those chords. If you have any problems, try to adjust. If you have, oops, I'm not pressing down hard enough on that G chord. Press down a little more firmly. Now these next two chords are a bit trickier. So sometimes if students seem like they have their hands full with G and E minor, I'll stop there. And if that's your case, that's perfectly okay. Just get those two chords down, and then you can watch the rest of this video later. But when you are ready, we can move on. So the next chord is going to be C, and it's going to look and sound like this. All right, so that's C. From the top down, my first finger is on the first fret of the B string. My middle finger is on the second fret of the D string, and my ring finger is on the third fret of the A string, and I am strumming 5 strings total, starting on the A string, strumming all the way through. So I am not playing the low E string. However, if you happen to bump it accidentally, it doesn't sound terrible. It is actually part of the chord, but we just want C to be the lowest note, which is this one right here, where my ring finger is. Okay, so try to go for 5 strings. This one's a little bit tricky for people. It's kind of a, it's a different position for your hand. You know, you have to get used to extending that ring finger up there a little bit and applying a good amount of pressure for each finger. So just go through that same process, you know, of trying to make the chord sound as clean and perfect as possible. If you hear any dead notes, try to make some adjustments, you know. Little tiny adjustments just to clear up some of those strings. Okay, go through string by string just like that. Again, apply the same practices, make sure it sounds good. And if necessary, what you can do is build the chord one finger at a time. So just start with the first finger, try to get that one, then add the middle finger, and then try adding the ring finger. With some extreme cases, you know, we'll stick with 1 or 2 fingers, maybe for younger kids or people just having a really tough time. You know, we'll concentrate on making that sound good for a couple weeks and then eventually trying to get to the bigger one. Anyway, so there's your C. And the last chord for today is going to be D. Looks like this. Also a bit tricky in its own way. It's a kind of a smaller shape. The fingers are kind of scrunched together. From the top down, my middle finger is on the 2nd fret of the high E string. My ring finger is on the 3rd fret of the B string. My first finger is going to be on the 2nd fret of the G string. So it forms a little V like that if you connect the dots, or an upside down triangle. And you're only strumming 4 strings. So you start your pick on the D string and strum through it. Now, if you strum 5 strings, it doesn't sound too bad. Again, A is part of the chord, this A string right here. So it gives you a bit of a deeper sound. You may not always want that, but you know, it is there. For right now, I would still recommend trying to aim for 4 strings just for practice. If you hit all 6 strings, it does not sound good. It's way too muddy. Okay, so definitely do not hit all 6 strings. Be a little more precise with your strumming. Hit 4 or at the most 5. But again, try to see if you can get 4. Again, going through the same practices we did before, trying to make it sound good. Listen for any dead notes, make those small adjustments, make sure your fingers are all pushing down firmly, and have some fun with your D chord. So there you go. Now that we have 4 chords, we can do what I like to call chord combinations, or just taking 2 chords and going back and forth, just like we did with G and E minor. So that was kind of your first chord combination, but now you can pick any of the 4 and mix and match. Just continue to work on making them each as clean as possible, and also try to notice how each chord transitions to the others. You know, take notes on how your fingers move. And again, just take your time and make sure they're right and sound good. So maybe you want to try like G and C. You know, 1 strum of G, switch to C, 1 strum of C, back to G. You know, and just do this for like a minute or however long you can sustain and keep your hand moving, etc. Maybe you want to try E minor and D. So like E minor, D, E minor, D. Again, if I have some problems, try to make those adjustments and remember how this feels. You know, try to take a little, try to save it for later. Back to E minor, D, make those adjustments. Back to E minor, make another adjustment. Back to D, there we go, back to E minor. Okay, so any of those chords will work. You know, they all sound good with one another. It's G, C, D, E minor. You know, they're all, there's tons of songs that use those 4 chords in various progressions. So you may very well transition from each one to each of the other ones. So definitely work on these chord combinations and practice the transitions, practice on making them clean. And when you're ready, we can move on to the final part of your chord practice.